Hello there and welcome once again to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Meyers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues, and we have a return visit today from Kris Steele.
Yes, Kris Steele is involved as Executive Director of the Oklahoma Criminal Justice Reform Committee and has done wonderful work in the criminal justice reform area for a number of years. Of course, he's distinguished himself in a lot of positions that we'll talk about a little bit, but he's kind enough to come tell us what's going on. It's a very topical issue right now.
Few more highly respected than Kris.
That's right.
In a lot of different areas.
That's right.
He's our guest today in The Verdict. We'll be right back.
I wanted to become a princess ever since I was little. Being crowned is an amazing feeling. It means everything to me to represent my tribe, especially as princess.
The Chickasaw Princess program has been in existence since 1963. The leadership and the skills that we learn as being the Chickasaw Princess has been handed down from generation to generation.
We're the ambassadors of the Chickasaw Nation for a year.
We're a special group of ladies that have represented different governors and lieutenant governors over the years.
I would tell young girls who want to become a princess just to go for it. Don't let any barriers stop you from doing what you want to do.
There are some dynamic young ladies that are going to be great ambassadors for the Chickasaw Nation out there. Once a princess, always a princess, with honor and dignity.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofanation.com.
The Vet Hero office at the University of Central Oklahoma, it is a one-stop shop for veterans when they're trying to get their education.
I call it my encore job. I get to take care of veterans. We help them transition. I was that guy that transitioned after 24 years, and in the end, GI Bill is a benefit that those soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine earned. It was the thing that made us the greatest country in the world coming out of World War II, and it will continue to do the same thing for this future generation of service members.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Meyers. Our guest today is Kris Steele, and Kent's going to give us a little more information on Kris.
Well, I'll reintroduce Kris. He's been on, this is his fourth appearance on our show. Kris is the Executive Director of Oklahoma Criminal Justice Reform Activity. He did his undergraduate work at Oklahoma Baptist University, got his master's at East Central University. He's currently a trustee of the Sarkees Foundation. Many of you will remember Kris from his service in the Oklahoma legislature, where he served from 2000 to 2012, and 2 years of that he served as Speaker of the House. He is also Executive Director of Teem, which is the Education and Employment Ministry. It's a ministry designed to help folks that need some additional assistance in education and employment, many of them coming out of incarceration. Kris, sure glad to have you back. Good to see you.
Thank you. I'm super honored to be here today.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Gosh, I don't know where to start. You've made so much success has been associated with your work in criminal justice reform, first of all. So congratulations on those steps you've taken forward. But I know you're going to respond, we got a long way to go.
We do. So very, very grateful, very thankful for the conversation that is occurring, for the progress that has been made. The reality is there are a lot of people who are responsible for the steps forward that are being taken in the state of Oklahoma, but we do still have a lot of work yet to do and a long ways to go.
Well, let's talk about the successes first.
Sure.
I don't know when the bottom was. I don't know when we should have been the most embarrassed of our criminal justice numbers and performance. But how far have we come so far?
Well, the reality is, I would say that a significant point in time was in 2016 when the voters of our state ultimately determined to view simple possession and individuals who battle addiction differently. And so in 2016, the voters of our state collectively said, it doesn't make any sense. It's not in anyone's best interest to send people to prison who battle addiction. That is a health issue, and it ought to be treated as such. And so in essence, the voters said people who struggle with addiction ought to be viewed as patients, not as prisoners. And that had a significant, started to have a significant reduction on our prison population, and it's afforded a lot of people, about 20,000 people to date since 2016, the opportunity to avoid a felony conviction and seek treatment to get the help that they need to move forward in life. So I think that was a significant moment in our state's history.
And so that's working? I mean, it's 780 and 781, is that what you're referring
to? Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have seen a reduction for those offenses within our prison population. The Office of Management and Enterprise Services, which is a financial entity in state government, estimates that last year those reforms saved the state of Oklahoma $26 million. And so we are seeing progress. And it's not just a financial aspect, it's the fact that families get to stay together, individuals receive the help that they need, and are able to move forward in a positive, productive manner.
We're seeing some successes there, and I'm very happy for that. I can attribute that vote by the people as the first step probably in a change of attitude.
Yes, sir.
For a lot of people in Oklahoma about trying to see things a little differently through a different lens than perhaps they had in the past. But one thing that I am concerned about, and just don't have the slightest idea what the answer is our incarceration rate. Even with that reduction and that savings, we still, I think, have one of the highest, if not the highest, incarceration rate in the United States.
That's correct. So unfortunately, even with the progress, the steps forward that we're discussing, Oklahoma still has the highest incarceration rate of any state in the nation. That's significant because America collectively has the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. And so if you extrapolate, ultimately where we're at, we have the highest incarceration rates per capita of any place in the civilized world, and it's just simply unacceptable where it should be. And so the reality is, even though we are beginning to see some movement, we still have a long way to go to reduce our incarceration rates, or even to bring them to the national average.
We aren't through distinguishing ourselves with that black statistic. We have the highest incarceration rate of women, I guess, any place.
We do, and so the reality is that Oklahoma, again, unfortunately, has had the highest incarceration rate for women since 1991, according to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, and that disparity continues to increase. And so we're seeing pockets of improvement throughout the state, but currently, Oklahoma incarcerates women at 2.5 times the national average per capita. And there's just a better remedy to deal with.
What is the reason? Do we describe laws differently? Do we penalize differently? Why is that?
Well, that's a great question, and I would say first and foremost that ultimately our sentencing guidelines are punitive in nature. Our system is heavy on retribution.
And set up to punish people.
Yes, sir, and short on rehabilitation, and so we have to start there. But then within our female population, we have to understand that there's been enough research that we now know what is causing most women to go to prison, and there's common characteristics, and it would include things like domestic violence and abuse, which results in unresolved trauma. And that trauma left unresolved ultimately often manifests itself in antisocial behavior. untreated mental illness. Unresolved trauma leads to anxiety, it leads to depression, it causes people often to begin to self-medicate. Addiction is another common reason that a woman would wind up in prison in Oklahoma. Poverty, limited educational opportunities, low self-esteem, things of that nature. And I love Oklahoma. I've only lived here, but I would say that we're not doing nearly enough to address those issues, those pathways, or those driving factors to female incarceration. And yet, when those issues result in somebody breaking the law, we're too quick to look at incarceration as a solution, and oftentimes that just makes the situation worse.
Are our sentences longer?
Oh, yes, sir. So, statistically, nonviolent drug offenders spend 70% longer in Oklahoma prison than anywhere else in the nation. Nonviolent property offenders spend up to 80% longer in Oklahoma prisons than anywhere else in the nation. So our sentencing ranges are way out of kilter with what's considered to be national practices or best practices or national averages. The reality is the research would conclude that excessive sentences does not reduce crime or increase public safety. It's not a deterrent. And so we need to be able to have a conversation that would allow us to reimagine and rethink what we're currently doing within our system.
And that could be fixed by the state legislature, couldn't it?
Oh,
Couldn't
certainly.
it be addressed?
Certainly. Just for what we're talking about now, the fact that repeat nonviolent offenders often spend up to life in prison, sometimes life without the possibility of parole. I mean, I would just say that under no circumstance should a nonviolent offender receive a life sentence in prison, and yet it occurs within our state. So the legislature certainly has the wherewithal to address those kind of issues and bring forth a remedy.
What kind of attitude do you perceive exists at the legislature that does not allow change?
Well, so change is difficult even when a person or a body collectively understands that change needs to occur. And I would say that there's a reason that Oklahoma has these horrific statistics, and it's probably because for 40 or 50 years we've based our political identity on being quote unquote tough on crime, and it's been politically advantageous for elected officials to run on that sort of platform and to produce those kind of policies. And so I think recently we're seeing a conversation that is emerging that basically says, you know what, we can be both smart and tough at the same time, but we're going to have to be able to differentiate between the person who is better served through treatment and supervision in the community versus the person who may pose a legitimate danger or threat and need to be incapacitated.
We're going to get to a break. Kris Steele is our guest. We're discussing criminal justice reform in the state of Oklahoma, and we'll be right back.
OU Law has a history and heritage that are unparalleled. At the University of Oklahoma College of Law, we empower our students to pursue the career of their dreams. We have the highest U.S. News ranking ever achieved by an Oklahoma law school. We are the first law school in the country to launch a college-wide digital initiative. And this year, our competition teams rank number 2 in the nation. OU Law, generations of excellence, limitless possibilities.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Meyers and our guest, Kris Steele. We've been discussing criminal justice reform. What are the next steps?
You know, there are some very obvious policy changes that other states have embraced that have produced tremendous results in the way of safely reducing their incarceration rates and actually improving public safety. And some of those would include, first and foremost, we need to consider reform within our supervision system. So what we're seeing is a high percentage of individuals who are returning to prison for what's called a technical violation. It doesn't mean that they've committed a new offense, but they've violated the terms or the conditions, the stipulations within their supervision. So that may mean missing curfew or missing a court date or missing a treatment meeting or even getting behind in fees and fines and things of that nature. And there are better ways to deal with those kind of issues than revoking a person's opportunity to be a productive citizen and sending them back to prison. So I think we have some serious work to do around our supervision policies and reform. I think another thing that we need to consider is the way that fees and fines are levied on a person who's involved in the criminal justice system. Oftentimes that becomes a huge impediment. It's a criteria that the person is required to pay back, and if they're not able to pay back, they get in more trouble. And so oftentimes that leads a person to do what they feel like they have to do, and I'm not justifying that, I'm just telling you the mindset and the reality. And again, we need to understand that we ought to be setting people up for success, not for failure.
Mm-hmm. Pre-trial determination, how does that play into all this?
Pre-trial policies and practices are very much a factor. So there is, this week, as a matter of fact, there was a very significant legislative study on the issue or the topic of bail reform. And so what we see within many of our jails are individuals get arrested. Now, they haven't been officially charged with anything, and they're placed in the jail, and they have to stay in the jail until their case is disposed of or until it comes up in court. And that can range anywhere from 30 days to 60 days, in some cases 90 days or 100 days. Well, that adds to the instability in a person's life, and statistically, the longer a person has to remain in jail, the more likely they are to have a worse outcome in the courtroom. Mm-hmm. And the reality is we have a judicial system that's based on the premise that a person is innocent until proven guilty, and we ought not to be prematurely detaining a person for something that they haven't been officially charged with.
What about the disparities in the Oklahoma criminal justice system relating to women?
Well, so we see disparities certainly within gender and the number of women proportionately that are incarcerated in Oklahoma, but we also see disparities in the number of people of color that are incarcerated in the state of Oklahoma. According to the last report, African Americans are incarcerated at a rate of 4.5 times higher than Caucasians. Native Americans are incarcerated at twice the rate of Caucasians. And so I think there's a discussion that also is merited that would allow us to consider what is causing that disparity and how can we eliminate it. There's no reason that certain populations ought to be overrepresented within our criminal justice system. And so Senator Young, for example, George Young, has introduced a concept that we would provide some data and some research prior to making any policy decisions that would allow the legislature to be aware of how a policy might affect a certain group of people so that we're not disproportionately impacting communities within our state.
Kind of an impact survey.
It's an impact statement. That's exactly what it is. I think it's a step in the right direction.
Well, what about the 1,200% increase in commutation recommendations? Is that a plus or a minus?
Well, it's just remarkable. It is positive to the nth degree. One of the things that is occurring in the state of Oklahoma is there is a group of law students who are doing internships to identify individuals who are serving excessive sentences within our prison system. and they're meeting with the individuals and they're doing all the research, and if indeed the sentence is excessive and meets the criteria, they're assisting with the commutation application, and then they're representing that individual to the Pardon and Parole Board. And I think through the appointments of Governor Stitt, we have some more reform-minded individuals who are on the Pardon and Parole Board, and we literally are seeing about a 1,200% increase in the number of commutations that are being recommended, which means that more people have an opportunity to have their sentences reduced. Now, that number is primarily because of some recent changes in the law. And for example, we talked earlier about the reforms that the voters passed through 780. At that time, those reforms only applied prospectively and not retroactively. Well, this year, the legislature and the governor determined to apply those reforms retroactively to everyone who is serving time in prison for simple possession or a low-level crime. And so that's going to allow about 800 individuals to return to their families on November the 4th in just a couple of weeks. And it's just an exciting time, and I couldn't be happier for those individuals and for their families and for the communities. And it's a workforce development issue. I think it's a pro-growth issue, and so I'm really excited about where we're at with these individuals having an opportunity at a bright future and a fresh start.
What about reentry programs? Are we behind the curve in that area too?
We are behind the curve in reentry. Again, this goes back to making sure that we are helping all the people within our state reach their full potential, and that we're setting people up for success. So some other states, for example, recently Texas, have passed laws that would require that prior to a person being released from prison and back into the community, they would have to have an ID, they would have to have a birth certificate, they would have to have a Social Security card, a resume, a job training, and some employment leads, and a transition plan in place. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think that we should be doing the same thing here in Oklahoma. We have some nonprofits that are really doing some good work, and I think collectively we're seeing more coordination and trying to help people successfully reintegrate, but there's more work to be done.
What is the impact of mass incarceration on children in Oklahoma? Foster children.
Sure. So there are so many issues that are connected to this issue of mass incarceration. I would just quickly mention that another statistic that we ought to be concerned about in Oklahoma is that we have the highest number of grandparents raising grandchildren per capita within our state. And every study that's conducted on that issue identifies mass incarceration as the #1 reason why. In addition to that, we're still currently under a federal lawsuit pertaining to our foster care system. The federal government came in 2012 and said we're not providing adequate services to the number of kiddos in foster care. Well, the number of kiddos in foster care is again directly related to this issue of mass incarceration. And so ultimately, the studies would indicate that children of incarcerated parents are 6 to 7 times more likely to become incarcerated at some point in their life than their peers. That's a generational cycle that needs to be considered. And so if there are ways to keep the family together and help mom or dad get the help that they need, obtain the skills that might be necessary to be a productive citizen, I think that's in everyone's best interest to consider that.
We got about 30 seconds left. What can people at home do? What would your action point be to people listening to the show and we want to help you?
Well, I would just say, first and foremost, contact your legislator and please let them know that you support responsible corrections reform initiatives. Get involved in volunteering with a nonprofit that's trying to help justice-involved individuals successfully overcome a troubled past. And join the conversation.
All right. Kris, thanks so much for your work and for coming on the show.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
again.
It's
We
an
really
honor to be
appreciate
here.
what you do.
Thank you.
Kent and I'll be right back with another word.
It used to be okay in teachers' lounges. It used to be okay in maternity wards. It was okay in sporting arenas, college campuses, and office spaces. But now that we understand the deadly dangers of secondhand smoke, that's not okay anymore. So why is it okay that thousands of employees are exposed to it every day at work? Bottom line, it's not okay. Let's protect hardworking Oklahomans. Join the fight at stopswithme.com.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
I really think people are so unaware of the number of kids waiting just in Oklahoma. And I think if more people knew that those children were out there waiting, I think that just by the way we live our lives and the people we talk to, that maybe we can help encourage adoption from Oklahoma.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Our guest today was Kris Steele, who was talking to us about criminal justice reform. So many different layers to this issue. I'm glad that Kris is making headway. I think we all wish that we were, as a state, were making headway faster.
Yes. The efforts, however, are Herculean that they're going through, and the charitable organizations that are helping is just a great partnership. The Oklahoma Committee for Criminal Justice Reform in Oklahoma is made up of a lot of fine folks with a lot of good knowledge, including Kris, who leads it. But I think we have reason to be cautiously optimistic that we'll see some results.
I hope so. Kris Steele was our guest today. You can get more information with Kris at Teem, TEEM.org. That's the website one of the organizations that Kris works for. And we have a website, theverdict.tv. You can log on and tell us about a guest you'd like to see or a topic you'd like to see discussed, and we'll look forward to hearing from you. For Kent, I'm Mick, and we'll see you next week here on The Verdict.